Okay, now video number 3. So video number 3 is a combination of video number 1 and video number 2. So you are going to be given a 90-degree triangle, and you're going to be given some specs, and you are going to have to solve the triangle. Now, solving a right triangle, that means you've got to find every single angle and every single side. So triangle number 1, you need to find capital A, capital B, capital C, and you need to find lowercase a, lowercase b, lowercase c. So capital C is 90 degrees, and capital B, what is that? 62 degrees. Okay. So capital A, so the capital letters, those are the angles. So A is going to be pretty easy. A is just going to be 90 degrees, take away 62 degrees, so that is going to be 28 degrees. So every triangle's got to have 180, and if I'm using 90 right here, these other two got to be 90. Okay, now the 12 is straight across from angle C. So 12 is going to be little c. So now all I have to find is little a and little b. And they're not going to give you hints into which direction to go. Now you can use whatever you want. And there's 10 different ways to do it. But if I mark it, so first you got to mark it up. So if I mark it from here, if I mark it from that 62, the 12 is the hypotenuse, and this is going to be the opposite, and that means this is going to be the adjacent. Now, I do not know the opposite, nor do I know the adjacent. I've got to find them both. And it doesn't matter which one you find first. So I'm going to find the opposite first. So I'm going to use the opposite with the 12. So I'm going to use the opposite with the hypotenuse. So that trig ratio is sine. So I'm going to use sine. But I do know the angle. You need to know two of the three things. So there's an angle and two sides. And I know an angle and a side. So if I know two of the three, I can find the third. So the trig is this. We're going to do the sine from that position, from the 62 degrees. And we already know what that is. Sine from 62, if I've got an angle that's 62 degrees, so 62 is like right there, and if I do the sine is going to be almost 88%, so almost 90% of the hypotenuse. So we already know what the sine is. So the sine from 62 is going to be the opposite, which I don't know what the opposite is, so we'll call that x, over the hypotenuse. And we do know the hypotenuse is 12. Okay, now the trig at this point is done. From here on out is cops and robbers. It's algebra. And now we've got an x on top. If you have x on top, you need to get x all by itself. So x is being divided by 12. So you need to do the inverse of divide. So you need to times this side by 12, and you need to times this side by 12. And this is all one command on a calculator. So remember, sine of 62, that's like almost 90%. But if I do 12 times sine of 62 on the calculator, we're just going to type in 12 times the sine of 62 and hit enter. And they want to round to the nearest tenth, so that side is going to be 10.6. So that means this: the opposite is across from angle B. So little b is 10.6. Okay, now when you erase this stuff, I've got to find little a. And you got two choices, since it's a 90 triangle and you got two sides, you could do Pythagorean theorem. You could do a squared plus b squared is c squared. But the trig is actually going to be faster. So now I'm going to do the a, and I'm going to do the a with h, so that's the cosine. So if I go cosine from that same position, from that 62 degrees, the ratio is going to be a over h, and I don't know what a is, so that's x. H is going to be 12. So now x is on top. So you got to remember, when x is on top, that's pretty easy. You just undo the divide. So times this by 12 times this by 12. But when x is on bottom, if you ever have x on bottom, that was like this. 15 divided by x equals 3. If you ever have x on bottom, all you do is switch those two places. And it's going to be 15 divided by 3 equals x. So that's how we got x equals 5. So when x is on bottom, you switch places. If x is on top, just inverse the divide. So times 12 times 12. So do this on your calculator. 12 times cosine of 62, 5.6. 12 times cosine 62. Enter. 5.6. Perfect. So you have now found all the specs of the triangle. So every triangle has got 6 specs. It's got 3 angles that you got to find, and it's got 3 sides that you got to find. So let's look at number 3. 3 is going to be a little different. 3 gives you this. Gives you kind of a tall, skinny triangle. So here's your 90. This is 2. This is 6. This is B. This is A. This is C. Okay, now 3, you could do Pythagorean theorem. You could go a squared plus b squared is c squared. But you're going to really prefer doing the trig. The trig's going to be faster. Now the problem is you don't know how much these angles are. But that's okay. This is actually easier to find an angle. It's easier to find an angle than it is a side. So do you want to mark it from A or do you want to mark it from B? Alright, let's go from B. If we mark it from B, let's find the hypotenuse first. This is going to be the hypotenuse. So this is going to be the opposite, and this is going to be the adjacent. Now, if I want to find angle B, do I want to use the hypotenuse with the opposite, the hypotenuse with the adjacent, or do I want to use the opposite with the adjacent? You want to use the 6 with the 2. So you want to use the hypotenuse with the adjacent. So the hypotenuse with the adjacent, that is this. That is cosine. Cosine from B equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So now do you remember what to do if I have the ratio but I don't have the angle? I've got to get B by itself. I've got to ditch the trig. I got to undo the trig, and the only way you can undo trig is you've got to do inverse. So inverse cosine of 2/6, and that will give you the angle. So if you go inverse cosine of 2/6, so if I go back to my trig and go inverse cosine 2/6, that angle, we're going to go to the nearest tenth, so that angle is actually opened up to 70.5 degrees. So here we go. You got to find capital A, capital B, capital C. Lowercase a, lowercase b, lowercase c. So capital B, we just barely found, that was 70.5 degrees. Capital C is 90 degrees. So if I do 90 take away 70.5, that's like 19.5 degrees. And they gave us 6. 6 is across from angle C. So 6 is little c. And they gave us 2, and that's across from angle A. So little a is 2. And now we've got to find little b. And then you can use trig to find little b. And that is it. We're off. Good luck.